Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for CIMA E2 for November 2014. I draw your attention to the September 2012 exam question 6, or if you're using the BPP exam kit, you're looking at question number 59 on page 25. And we're going to focus in on 59a, which deals with this issue of PRINCE, okay, or PRINCE2. So the requirement here asks us to look at how the PRINCE2 methodology would have helped the failures in a particular sort of painting system. You know, very often within E2, or in fact more than very often, you'll get a problem or a scenario with a series of problems, and you'll be asked to apply, for example, a tool or technique, or indeed a methodology in this case, to the situation to see how it would have helped. Okay, so we're looking at PRINCE2, and in this particular scenario, we have a company called L, and they're a manufacturer of cars. They've invested in some sort of robotic painting system, and indeed the quality of the paint work for each car is a critical success factor, so it needs to go right for them. Okay, and what has happened, unfortunately, in relation to this particular project is that they've experienced a series of problems, and much of the scenario outlines problems and difficulties that they are having. This second paragraph here, they're saying that at the end of the project they were over budget, not in line with quality, and this resulted in some cars being delivered late, and of course associated sort of reputational issues. You know, much of what we see within project management centers around this time, cost, and quality, and problems associated with those constraints, and in effect the iron triangle. What we see when we move down into the third paragraph, there's been some conflict between the project manager and the project board, in the sense that they're blaming each other, saying it wasn't their responsibility. They clearly didn't use any sort of methodology, PM methodology, and therefore the controls were weak or indeed non-existent. So what we're required to do, which I'll show you in a moment, is just to see how PRINCE2 would have helped that situation. Okay, so you'll see within the layout of the answer here a little bit different, as I've said before, to the BPP answer. Perhaps the BPP answers are a little bit better structured, but I'll take you through this one. So really, the first paragraph here is looking at a sort of a brief introduction to PRINCE2. Okay, so what do we know about PRINCE2? Well, essentially, it's a sort of a process-based approach that is in effect scalable. Very useful because it can deal with just about any type or style of project. Okay, and it focuses on sort of key sort of outputs and indeed inputs, and places quite a sort of a rigid set of controls, or indeed bureaucratic controls, around the planning, executing, and monitoring of a given project. Okay, now had this sort of style of methodology been used, they make a nice point here that various issues identified within the scenario would have been rectified earlier. So PRINCE2 would have helped this particular entity avoid or perhaps minimize some of the problems associated with the robotic system. Okay, now what we do in the rest of this answer here is that it goes through, the main components of PRINCE2 and what it does. Now, a key point is this idea of, organizational structure, or indeed an organizational chart. Okay, and PRINCE2 requires that at whatever level of sort of complexity or size for the given project. And what that will do is provide clear sort of authority and indeed responsibility. And from that, what you'll have is the idea that sort of we'll be able to authorize particular sort of work packages and indeed allocate them to specific members. Okay, reference here, and you'll see this in several of the paragraphs below, to this issue of control, and again cost, time, and quality. Next point, over and above the structure, or indeed some sort of chart, is this idea of business case. Now, this is important for PRINCE2, or indeed an answer relating to PRINCE2, because this is fundamental. This idea that that the objectives and indeed the sort of overall scope of a given project is clearly outlined at the outset. And what you'll see within PRINCE2 sort of questions and answers is this idea of this business case being referred back to throughout the project, and possibly even updated. And so in essence, what it does is it allows us to identify the key objectives and indeed the scope, and ensure that the entity or the project stays aligned to sort of business objectives and indeed benefits. They refer back to the fact that if they had done this on a regular basis, then perhaps the reputational issues would have been avoided. So they're constantly referring the answer and the core elements of PRINCE2 back to the scenario. Okay. Next point, we talk about sort of monitoring really and control. You'll see that control is mentioned through many of the paragraphs within this answer. What PRINCE2 recognizes is that we need to have some sort of standards, plans. We need to have budgets, and what we need to do is to monitor regularly and indeed formally against those plans. So we're monitoring sort of actual versus budgeted. The other point that is crucial here is just this idea of checkpoints, or indeed control points. Yeah. So we would have within the use of PRINCE2 various sort of control points or checkpoints broken down into stages. Over and above that, this idea of reporting. Reporting is important, and certainly documentation pervades each area of PRINCE2. If you're doing an answer on this area, make sure that you mention the fact that there's certainly a sort of an overload of documentation required. So reporting on progress towards plans is certainly important in a number of ways. And again, you'll see mention of time and cost down here with reference back to the problems outlined for L company. Okay. In addition to this, we talk about sort of products. Again, this is to a large extent sort of documents, really, and the use of PRINCE2 encourages these management products. So things like a project initiation document, a budget, quality plan, and indeed various progress reports. Okay, clearly with these in place, controls would have been much better. Okay, so little summary here down at the bottom in terms of really what's the essence of PRINCE2, and it's very much that it provides structure. It provides structure in many senses, and provides a lot of documentation to be complete. And I guess with that overall, we're looking at a high degree of control based on that structure, indeed the documentation required, and that would have assisted in certainly the planning, execution, and really any part of a project. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. Do study this area carefully. This is a popular topic for the E2 examiner, and pretty common in the exam. Okay.